So to start, let's go all the way back to your start as an artist. You have a BFA in painting, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just give us like a little background, like all the way back on what got you into art and sort of your start as an artist.
Uh, I remember, I remember as a little kid, there's a really like my parents. They're very light on religion. They're like a Unitarian. They go to Unitarian church, and I didn't like going to church, but I would just sit there and doodle and draw when we had the preacher, not the preacher. It was like this well-known orator in Washington D.C. and he was like a civil rights activist preacher guy.
Yeah.
I remember all the time listening to him kind of describe these kind of spiritual concepts in like a socially activist kind of way, which
Yeah.
is like what people did in the 70s, especially like in a big metropolitan area, specifically in Washington, D.C., which is very politically like social justice and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So I remember doodling a lot listening to this man talk. And I remember thinking, like, there's not, like, what am I going to do with, like, what is this that I'm doing? And then I realized that somebody told me, like, oh, you're making art. And I was like, oh. But I was, like, really young.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't making anything I could recognize. I was just drawing lines and, like, going, this is fun.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was bored. But then looking back on it, like, I was listening to these actually well-known sermons that people point to as being like, that was a really important time and place in Washington, D.C.'s history, in the country's history in the mid-'70s, And so I think what I was making when I was like 4 or 5 years old were like versions of abstract art. Yeah. Anyway, and then like I went on, I started getting into sculpture. I started doing ceramics by the time I was in my young teenage years. I kept doing ceramics into my like up until I was like 18 years old. I got into the Art Institute. I was with my ceramics work in San Francisco Art Institute. When I was 18, I moved from Washington D.C. out to California, and I probably gave up on ceramics and went straight into regular sculpture. And then they didn't want me there. I was a terrible sculptor. I just made trash art, wishing I could make something else. They kind of kicked me out of they didn't really kick me out of the sculpture department, but by the time I was like 19, they railroaded me into the painting department because I was probably like I didn't know how to make anything.
Okay.
So I think they just wanted to get rid of me. And since I was into painting as well.
Yeah.
And since I didn't know how to make anything, and I obviously was working a lot, they're like, why don't you paint first before you actually try 3D? And so at that time, the Art Institute didn't have any 3D design classes or any kind of like foundational classes. They just kind of threw you to the wolves. And that's what I did. I did like figure drawing and I did painting. I took some other classes, but yeah, like some intellectual classes. But yeah, I got railroaded into the painting department and I got a painting degree, graduated in 92 and I was like 22 years old. Yeah. So I don't know if that's the roundabout way of getting to what you were saying or.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
So I mean that's interesting because the first the first sculptures that I'd seen by you were those found sticks that you built the dowel structures around. So I mean, hearing that you weren't very technically proficient in 3D work to that.
Well, I was terrible back then. Yeah, I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
It's funny. When I started doing those pieces, that was into my 30s, probably in my mid 30s. When I graduated, I don't know what happened, but I was also in like bands and stuff when I was also all throughout that time. I was also playing drums. Yeah. And I was in different bands in Washington, D.C. We moved out to San Francisco in the early 90s. I was in another band with a lot of my buddies that moved from D.C. out to San Francisco. And we started the band back up. And then I went, basically, after I graduated from the Art Institute, I was like, okay, I'm done with art for a while, and I was just basically just doing music for 10 years.
Yeah.
And between the ages of 22 and 32, I barely thought that I'd ever get back to doing visual art. When I did finally come back to doing visual art, it was completely like I was starting over again, you know. And so I went, and so what I did, I kind of went through a big, like, I didn't know what I was doing with music. I had a little bit of success. I had a big amount of failure. I was like, what the hell am I going to do? I go on these long walks in the beautiful woods out here in California. I pick up these driftwood sticks from the beach or wherever I was, come back home, look at them. I also used to work for a sculptor during this time. That was one thing, is that when I was working for the sculptor, that kind of like took away my own personal Jones to make my own art, because I was working for a sculptor. And then after working for the sculptor, I'd go and play music at night with my band. So I was still making art. I was still keeping my hands busy and doing things like artisanal but it wasn't my vision. I was working for this older guy.
Yeah.
And it's okay. And it's funny, right after he passed away in 2005, I thought to myself, it was like 1 month later. It's like Lou Pearson just passed away. I need to get my own studio now. So it was really like that age-old like passing of the torch, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting for me to think about, that I got the art bug after my kind of mentor, artist boss guy passed away in 2005. And then that's when I started making those sticks. It was in 2005, in 2006. And he used to always go up into the woods and bring back burls and stuff and say, study this, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in a weird way, that became like this weird homage to Lou, you know, me making art for the first time, even though I'd made art before, but it's like completely different. So, yeah. And I didn't really even think of them then as being that technically proficient. What they were is me spending a lot of time on them. Yeah. And when you spend a lot of time on something really small, they look technically proficient, you know.
That's fair.
Yeah. Anyway.
So is that the body of work that pretty much led to you coming to Delaware to pursue your MFA, or is there something in between?
There was, that body of work got me probably to about 2010, 2011. So I made those sticks kind of exclusively for about 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. I would paint houses and stuff, but like I would just come home and make my sticks, basically. All my free time. And then, gosh, I don't know what happened. I started thinking about. I also, at the same time, was doing faux finish, and I started thinking about faux finish as being something like putting more 3 dimension to faux finish. And so I started making kind of lumps come off the wall instead of just painting lumps and designs on the wall. I was like, what if I actually made these things kind of come off the wall? And so that body of work was going on right around the same times I got bored with doing the sticks, or I just started thinking about me being a faux finish artist that would make lumps on the wall instead of just painting lumps on the wall. And I thought maybe that could be a business thing. I was like, maybe I could be a faux finish guy that made lumpy walls.
Yeah.
Just kind of crazy because nobody really wants that. But I thought, why not? You know, like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But then, I don't know, all kinds of things were going on around. And I started making these shapes. Instead of the lumps, they just turned into free shapes by themselves. I would start taking these shapes out into nature, taking pictures of these shapes, doing nothing, like styrofoam, like coated in paint, doing nothing in trees. I had no idea what I was doing, but I just kept, I don't know. And then, but I realized that I needed to get my degree, because I was really kind of like doing it a lot and not really knowing what to do with it, and not knowing how to talk about it, not really getting any traction in any kind of art scene in the Bay Area, because I didn't have the vocabulary, or I forgot how to have the vocabulary. I don't know. I just felt out of touch with any kind of art scene out here. And so I decided to come to school and learn and try to teach myself what I'm doing with these shapes. Like, what are they doing? You know?
Yeah. So I guess my next question would be, what landed you on Delaware? I mean, from California to Delaware, there's pretty much every art school in between.
Well, I grew up in Washington D.C. and Maryland, and and also to tell you the truth, there were a couple schools out here that were free. Actually, Stanford would pay for you to go to grad school out here.
Mm.
Cal is pretty. I don't know. I think for just a tiny bit of money, like Berkeley. I applied to those two schools, and I also applied to Delaware because I knew that was free too. So I just, I tell anybody that wants to go back to get their MFA, don't pay any money for your MFA. If you can get into a program that you can like walk away from it with even some cash in your pocket, that's the best. Because you don't want to have to pay for that. No, you go do that for free each, whatever you need to do. So to make a long story short, God, I didn't even get a call back from Cal. Stanford gave me an interview. They're like, oh, you didn't get in this year. Apply next year. You'll probably get in. And I was like, you know what? I want to go right now. So I waited for my reply from Delaware, and Lance was like, hey, you want to come to Delaware? This looks good. Why don't you take a crack at it? And so I was like, I'm not going to wait around for Stanford. I'm just going to go to Delaware. And my parents are still back in Maryland, and they're getting older. And so I was like, you know what? This could be a good thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if my parents weren't back there, if I didn't grow up like kind of near there, I used to always go to the like down in Delaware all the time as a kid, So I know that area. I had friends in Philly. I've got friends in New York. So it felt like a good time to kind of go back there and do what I was doing in California. And I don't think I would have had as much traction and made as much progress with my art had I stayed out here, because I feel like I needed that kind of change of lots of things to kind of like take up what I was doing.
Awesome. So my next portion, I feel like a lot of the work that you've done that I was gonna like talk us through was more towards the end of your time at Delaware.
Yeah.
So what were you doing when you first got to Delaware?
When I first got to Delaware, I kind of just started making the same shapes I was making back in Oakland. And it was just kind of rehashing what I was already doing. I was like, why change things? I'm just going to keep doing what I do and see what happens. So the first couple things I did in Delaware is just completely the same thing I was doing in Oakland, which was making these kind of handheld shapes that are about this big. I still have some in the basement. I should go get one. And then kind of remaking the same things I was making out here, and then seeing what people thought of them. And I would put them in piles and take pictures of these kind of shapes in piles in different locations all around like Newark. And so that's the first project. So first project I was doing. The crits didn't go so well with those, but they kind of got about like what color painting them, because suddenly they were turning very white, and I was thinking about at that time I was thinking about bringing the inside walls and making like the room throw up into the outside, like weird. So like the walls climbed like kind of like disintegrated and walked out into the middle of this. There's still these white shapes.
Yeah.
And so I started becoming interested in them being parts of walls that suddenly are appearing on trees in weird situations. But they're kind of like really letting you know what material they are. They're just these amorphous, strange shapes. And so it's almost like the DNA of wall, the DNA of drywall or something. Like they're just dumb shapes, basically. And then I started thinking about them like, oh, they're white. I could do, I like it the different ways that light hits them. Oh, like they could translate into the virtual world really quickly. I could project on them. I could,
Yeah.
And I started thinking about like what colors could they be, and then I started reading about like I don't know. I know. I was also thinking about. I guess this probably goes to the next question you're probably going to ask me, which is like, what happened next?
Yeah,
And
basically.
yeah, and so I was really struck, and this is to come full circle of where I grew up. Like one thing that I still miss about the East Coast is the change of seasons, like how really lush into like really not lush. Just the changing, and also the forms of ice, like that when the White Clay Creek would get really cold, and it would like the ice just rise up and like spit itself out of the creek bed,
Yeah.
and just the changing like forms of nature, and it started making me think also about like that like the nature of the environment of Delaware, of the East Coast in general, and I started thinking about uh, the colors that I see and metaphors and all that stuff. So I decided to paint these shapes green, and that became like a really big deal. Wow, they're green.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about different shades of green. I started reading about how like cameras, and not only cameras but our eyes, not only our eyes but every mammal's eyes, even more importantly, birds' eyes, are more sensitive to all the minutia of different colors of green than any other vibration on the rainbow. So you can pick out like many more times shades of green than any other color that you'll ever see, any other mammal will see, and for that matter, any other bird will ever see, and cameras too. So your cell phone camera is really sensitive to the color green, and so interestingly, all of that brings us to green screen, and all of that also brings us to new growth because the green screen green that you use, that most people use, which is the opposite of our skin tone, just happens to be almost the exact same color as springtime growth on new trees. And so this kind of parallel between new growth coming out in the springtime of trees, and then technological new growth, which is happening like in civilization. I like that mirror and those kind of confluences. I thought that was really interesting for my work. And so these shapes that I was starting to take off the wall and put out into the world were like these virtual representations now of new growth that I see outside that's also happening in human culture. And so these virtual shapes now, when I take them outside, become like when I put them in water or something like that, become uh, now dependent on the forces of the outside world, which can like make them do all kinds of things. So that's our imagination now adrift in the natural world. That's a lot. That's a whole lot to chew on, but I don't know. We can probably parse that apart a little bit better. So I'll take your next question.
Yeah, that'll be. I can organize that to sound good
Okay.
because I mean that was an excellent. I mean that worked your way through pretty much my next
Yeah.
questions.
Okay.
Um, I wanted to ask about your video and projection work, but I think just based on the answer to the previous question, I want to talk about your relationship with nature. Obviously, it plays a big role in your work, and I remember when we were at UD together, hearing stories about you going out into nature to sort of set up your work.
Yeah.
Sometimes getting quite dangerous with it.
Uh,
Um,
like what did you hear?
I remember you. I remember one story specifically. You were telling me this. You were trying to. You were just like setting one of your sculptures afloat. It was like I think you were pretty much done, and you were just doing this for fun, like right at the end. And halfway through doing it, you realized that you were like balanced on a suspended log to try and like push this piece out, and you just had the realization of like, oh shit, I'm out here by myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I would do that. I like to get the best shot. There's funny things when you're in the moment. You're like, I gotta get this shot.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I more just want to like I want to hear from you. I guess when you realized this this intimate relationship with nature, and that, and I'm gonna have to structure this better when I write it too. How it would relate to your work, and how it would play in your real life as well as in your art. Is that, if that makes sense?
Uh, you know, I guess, being kind of growing up in the city,
Mhm.
I don't, I don't think, I think growing up in the city, we got out to the woods, and now we didn't get out as much as I wish that we did.
Mhm.
And so, like, I think that city kids have an interesting and sometimes even more fanciful idea of nature than what it really is. And I think that because like if you grew up in the city and you take cars all the time and it's loud and it's noisy and it's like
Mhm.
uh, your imagination, like you get nature, David Attenborough nature movie or PBS, nature shows, like those are still
Yeah.
really like cool and important, and you read nature magazines instead of really experiencing it. And
Yeah.
I think if my artwork ever resonates, it's that filter that media has really on what nature is that I like to exploit and play with. So well, I love nature, of course, but my artwork is more looking at the way nature is presented and filtered in new media and old media for people that aren't around it that much. Like people like I wouldn't mind having like a fireplace on my TV all the time.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
like an aquarium. Those things like now sound kind of nice to me.
Yeah.
I think that was ridiculous. Like why don't you just go sit out in the park? And like
Yeah.
now I'm realizing like, oh, because that's like as you get older, like there's not that many parks to go to that are cool. And at that's all like the white elephant of the room is that the more and more the environment turns to shit, the more and more we're going to depend on these virtual representations of nature as nature. And so I think my artwork has an uneasy relationship with the idea of media representing the virtual world now being nature. Anyway, so of course I'd love to get out to nature more. I wish I had, but I'm not. I'm a city kid through and through. Like I'll never
Yeah.
be that person. But I'll always have like my kind of mental retreat to that place where I think nature is.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it really is.
Yeah.
My messed up idea from watching nature shows and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
And so I was probably one of the earlier, like, I'm probably like the precursor to a lot of other kids or a younger generation that's even more that way because of the internet. Even though I didn't grow up with the internet, but I
Yeah.
grew up with like nature shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only see it just becoming more pronounced.
Awesome. So now, I guess going off of that, you started working in video, sometimes projecting onto your sculptures, sometimes using that green that you talked about as a green screen, correct?
Yeah.
So what sort of both what got you to this point in your work and how did you decide what you were displaying and when?
Uh, what got me to that point? Uh, I think a lot of it had to do with set and setting. That me coming back to the East Coast and really, I don't know if I would have made that big of a stride if I lived out in California. I don't know if I would have jumped straight into video.
Yeah.
Um, but I do have a history with time-based art with being music, and I have a history of using music software, and it's a pretty quick jump from music software to video software, and so time-based media became pretty normal to me, like kind of like making abstract plots through time with video
Yeah.
didn't seem that far away from what I used to. So if I have these tools, I'll use them, I guess, was my attitude, especially since I was I was looking at an old kind of setting, which was the East Coast through new eyes, you know.
Yeah.
And so it was great to be back east and be back kind of like, oh, I know these sweaty hot summers, I know these cold winters, I know this landscape, you know, and
Yeah.
and look at it kind of freshly. So and so tell me the rest of your question. I'm sorry.
Just kind of how you decided what um, what it was that you were recording or displaying or projecting or interacting with.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you point blank how I decided. I think that like I think with artists like decisions are like a really like a series of tiny little inclinations that you act upon, and I don't think that a lot of artists go, aha, I'll make this, and then spend the next like 5 weeks making that, because I think artists just don't have. I mean, some may. There's some conceptual artists that are like, this is a great idea. I will commit to this idea for a year. Like, I don't think there's that many artists that do that. The ones that do that probably are really successful. You know, Jeff Koons is like, I'll just make a big doll, you know.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But I think that there's a lot of other artists that are more like me that are just making tiny little decisions, and then like you look back, like it's like the Emerson quote, like tiny little tic tacs on a ship across the ocean. Like you tack this way, you tack that way, you tack this way. Before you know it, you're going in a straight line if you zoom out, but you don't really know you're going in a straight line, right?
Yeah.
And so, I can't really say I had a point in time when I made a decision. I just kind of arrived at the place. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting to ponder, especially myself.
Yeah, it's like what's that?
I said especially like myself, because I ask so many people about their process in doing this now that I often don't even think about my own.
Yeah.
But to kind of get an insight on the physical process of your work, you said you're kind of following tiny inclinations. So is a piece starting and then you're kind of just letting it form itself as it goes? Like, yeah.
Well, I think that for no, I mean, I tell you that there are moments when you're like, okay, I really like this clip of video, you know?
Yeah.
And so, okay, well, I guess in another way, I can totally say like, oh, I started to make this piece and I followed through on this idea, and it took me like 3 months.
Yeah.
And so there was one piece I made where I came out from UD. I had a winter vacation in California. In California, we get these huge winter storms, right?
Yeah.
I'm really interested in shorelines and how shorelines can get eaten away by these big, huge storms. Mm-hmm. People do to like protect their houses against these big. And so one of the things in Pacifica they do is they I don't know, I guess they get the city to pay, but they just, I don't know, like truck in these huge boulders. They stick them down on the shoreline.
Yeah.
To protect, like, storm abatement, right? They do it on all the beaches, especially on the East Coast too, because Rehoboth Beach is sinking. Like,
yeah.
And so on one of the really big like high tide events, the king tide events that happened in December or January, I went down to Pacifica. There was going to be this big storm coming, so I would go down there with my camera, and I start shooting some of these rocks. It just gets pummeled by these huge waves, and it's really quite something, like.
Yeah.
And so I got to do something with this. So what I do is I go back to Delaware with this footage of these rocks just getting, like inundated with this white foamy seawater. Yeah. And I'm like, what if I made a sculpture of those rocks, and every time the waves came, the white would come and it would walk the sculpture, and then you could actually see the sculpture. But then when the waves came back, you could then get focused on the rocks, and then you wouldn't see the sculpture anymore. You would just see the rocks, and so it would go back and forth like the white would come in, the waves would come in, meaning that you get foamy seawater, meaning you could see the sculpture, and then when it went back out, you'd see the rocks. You can't see the sculpture. So that was the gag, and I was like, I'm just gonna make sure that I can make that, and so that is one of those pieces that to me like tight piece. As far as what it says, like conceptually or metaphorically, I don't really care that much to digest it. It probably means something to everybody. I just think it's provocative, you know.
Yeah.
It was like peekaboo with storm abatement rocks. Like I see you now. I see you now. You know.
Yeah.
Like you're going to be washed away and just be a memory or this dumb sculpture. You know?
Yeah. So I think that was, I mean, that's, well, is there any specific body of work that you've done or been doing since you left school, or have you kind of been on a hiatus? Or
every time I start working a full-time job or I can make a good amount of money, my attention goes back to music, and I tell you why is because my art projects just take a lot more mental space and time, energy to complete the projects, it feels like. And I did do a couple residencies right after UD, and that was great. But it's just to support yourself, you've either got to hook on to some kind of gig that allows you to keep making art, or you take a regular 9 to 5 and find another way to do your art. As you're finding out, which it looks like you're figuring it out pretty good, man. And so like I'm kind of splitting the difference, and I think back to my 20 years ago when I was working for the sculptor, and we made big bank jewelry sculpture, and when he passed away, then I started making art. And I'm kind of like a little bit circling back because this guy Phil Ross that I work for now is an artist friend of mine from back in the Art Institute days when I was like your age, and now he started this company which is based on mycelium, and he made art out of mycelium before he started this company. And so he's an artist that started like this pretty promising new company that basically started out as an art project. And so when I started like hanging out with Phil, and we were talking about these, mushroom being a viable alternative to all kinds of like, we could use it instead of wood, we could use it instead of leather. We just like have to kind of figure out how to engineer the growth of this material, of this fungus. But that started as an art project. Like that didn't start out as anything but that. There's no theoretical considerations. It's just you just start working with the material and see what it does, and you don't try to like make it do stuff. You just see what it could do. And so that kind of attention to the materialness of what you're working with, and I think that there's a parallel between that. Oh, how strong is this stick? How much can I glue in onto this stick and make these weird forms? Like it's just getting to know the material you're working with, and that's like what attracted me to his work. And so in a funny way, if I can like working for him feels like it also working on an art project, even though it's turned into like a real business. And so I'm still trying to convince myself of that. But I come home and play guitar,
Yeah. That's awesome. So that's really cool that company started out that way. So just two questions to kind of wrap it up. The first one is going to be the easier of the two, which is just like, what are your future plans, tentative, if you have any, especially as far as art is concerned?
Right. Well, right now, it's interesting. Well, I just actually, it's funny. I can't say that I haven't done any art lately because I did do a really fun project with 181, which is Abby Donovan's performance group, and she her and the 181 Collective went down to a rest stop that I've been to a couple times in Smyrna, which is like this huge rest stop on one going down south. And I wasn't there, but I kind of beamed in. My artwork somehow got beamed into the rest stop. I don't even know if it was on a wall or if it was just on somebody's laptop or what. But I participated in the same time. I beamed it in to the people that were there. I don't know what happened. But in Oakland, what I did was I started interacting physically. Like they say, when you don't know what to do, you start using your own body. And that's totally what I did. I never thought I'd be that guy to like. So like at work, we have these big jumpers, these big white jumpsuits, right? Mm-hmm. And they're like clean room suits because when we go into the bubble, work with the reishi mushrooms, we have to be totally clean. And so we wear these big jumpsuits, like hazmat suits, and they're all totally white. And so when I started, I was like, oh, those white things would take video really well. So I took some of my old video that I shot, and I started messing in my white suit. Like I started playing drums when the sea foam started blowing around, like a clip of sea foam. And I started like caulking the horizon line in the of this beautiful beach scene in Northern California with rocks and everything. But it was catching the back of me, so I became like getting projected onto. So I started doing these really funny. And what else? I started painting clouds as the video was going. Just kind of like, I don't know. That was a really fun project. I don't know how or where that's going to go. But my new big thing that I'm looking forward to is actually making a music video, and it's taking one of my old videos that I did for a residency at Practice Gallery in Philadelphia, using a stop motion earthworks video I did and putting it to one of my new songs called Making Space. And what I do is kind of like flash because the lyrics really come rapid fire. And this one song in particular is about like making space for a non-human world. And so like what we can do to usher in the next evolution of whatever. And so it's kind of, what I'm going to do is flash the words on the video, but in the background there's going to be this big it's going to be this earthwork video which has no people in it, but you can tell people were digging up. It's like a stop motion video of earth getting dug.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so that's my newest project, and it's a music video, but it's also really like a weird earth art video as well. So that's the next thing that I'm working on, and I'll send you guys a copy of it. I'd like to get it done like next week if I can. I just have to figure out how to do the video editing and make it look like the words are not completely covering over all the cool video, you know. Mm-hmm. But the words will come rapid fire, you know.
Oh, okay, awesome. And then my final question, and this is, so since we work with schools so much and a lot of students, I like to ask our interviews, especially who've been through a lot of schooling, not a lot of schooling, but who've been through art school, just kind of their thoughts on school. And you having gone through two very different experiences in academia, both different eras and just like different like experiences, you know. So what are your overall thoughts on the academic process as artists? What are your thoughts on how it's developing, and what do you think it needs or lacks, if anything?
Boy, that's a huge question. You know, I mean, there's me that are like, you know, artists born, they're not made, you know, and like, there's an art gene. I'm kind of convinced of it, and it's like you either have it from the get-go or you don't. And it's like there's also people that play fucking basketball the best you've ever seen, and some people that can't hit the side of a barn, you know. It's just I don't know. And it's like some people, and no matter like what they do, even if they don't ever go to art school, like they got it. and whether anybody finds out about it or anything. And so my attitude is like, I think art schools need to train. First of all, these it's like a thing like game recognized game. Like you got to get people who know how to look for that gene.
Yeah.
And most people that make it to a professorship, it's not new to them, this idea. And so I think that you have to convince like the people that are in the directing the art department. If you want to cultivate like a good cadre, like a good stable, that's what they say. That's a terrible word. But if you like, gallery has a stable of artists. But it's not that dissimilar from a gallery thing. Like an art department will say, we offer this and we make these, like, especially the grad school department wants to be like, Phil McGaughy or Forrest or whoever went to our school or went to our graduate program, and we want you to know about them, because they went to our program. And so I feel like that art gene has to be like cultivated and recognized, like really almost. And I don't want to be discriminating, but I think that there should be a little bit like, this is not your thing. You're more of a graphics artist. I think that it should be really like almost impersonal, a little bit blunt, not uncaring, but like separate the wheat from the chaff from the get-go. Because a lot of people can get derailed into going like, oh, it's art, so fun. Like, you're not doing art, you're doing craft, and I love it that you're making this pinch pot and stuff. And I love that, but I think that there needs to be kind of like, there needs to be, from really quickly at art schools, there has to be a line that says, this is art, this isn't. And I don't know why we have to. That's really asshole-ish, believe me. But I mean, and I think that there's some real asshole like art departments that probably do exactly what I'm saying. But I mean, some that don't, and I'm sure there's all kinds of ways to debate that. And I'm sure, and it's an uncomfortable debate too, because then it's like, it's culture. It's also like, what considers, like, why, like, who's going to make that call, right? But I feel like good art like transcends, and people know good art also transcend. And so I feel like there are some like universally respected critics that can influence that, They kind of have that thing. But of course, it's very hierarchical too. It's like, why does this guy have so much power, And you see it kind of trickle down also in smaller institutions and even places like UD. Like this professor has a little bit more sway. Why? I don't know. You have to kind of suss it out. And I'm sure like every art scene has that. I'm sure Philadelphia has it in spades. Like old town kind of place. Newer places don't have that as much.
Okay.
It feels like there's more of a trickle down of like authority and criticism. Places like Vox Populi, they're kind of the figurehead of the new, cutting avant-garde, Out here, there's more plurality, more different kinds of points of view. It feels like Philly has about 4 or 5 galleries that kind of direct it, kind of come down to it, which I think is like a little bit more of an East Coast thing. I'm okay with it. It feels a little stifling sometimes. I'm not so great about talking about art scenes, but I mean those are my thoughts, And I think that the art gallery world and the academia world are a lot more connected than a lot of people want to talk about. It's just culture. It's all culture.
Well, that was awesome.
Yeah, I forget. Was that both questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that was a really good answer.